Thanks so much for joining. This is Susie Church Brown, and I am here again with Hannah Engel Rebetzer. And we are talking more about foreign service kids and universities. So this is podcast number 3 in an indeterminate number of sessions. But today, so before we've talked about what it is the colleges are looking for in their applicants. That was the first one, if you want to revisit that. And then the second one, we talked about what it is that students should be looking for or could be looking for in their universities, and how to make a balanced list for their applications. So today what we're going to be talking about is affordability. And there are so many different factors that come into this particular topic. So we're going to try and do our best to do justice to all of them. So welcome, Hannah. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. I think before we start, it's important to define some terms that get thrown around a lot when talking about affordability, and it can be quite confusing. So I'm going to just run through a couple quick definitions. The first is financial aid. So this is kind of the umbrella term, and this covers both need-based aid and merit aid. So it's any money that your son or daughter are getting to attend an institution. And then this, financial aid is then divided into 2 buckets. One is need-based aid. So this can come in, these can be grants, work study, scholarships, federal loans. Your need-based aid can come from both the federal government and from the institution itself.
And need-based, just to clarify, need-based is basically the difference between what you say you can contribute, you, student and or family, and what the cost of tuition and all of the fees are.
Yeah, I think I'd even think about need-based aid as just money that is coming from an institution because they think you have a financial need, because it varies. What we call the gap, the amount that you're able to pay and the cost of the institution. Very rarely there are very few colleges that commit to meeting the gap.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think just thinking about need-based aid is money that your kid's going to get because you have a financial need. And sometimes the federal government determines that, and sometimes an institution determines that, and sometimes you're getting need-based aid from both the government as well as the institution.
Okay.
I think I think before we move on, I think one thing that a lot of foreign service families say is we're not even going to do our apply for aid because we don't qualify for need-based aid. And that's a big myth. On the federal level, most foreign service families' income will be high enough that they won't qualify for federal need-based aid, but on an institutional level, many foreign service families do in fact qualify for need-based aid. So a quote from Harvard Site says, financial aid will be available to many of the students from families with incomes above $200,000. Other schools quote to even be in the 300s, right? So those institutions have determined or decided that they are going to give need-based aid for what we would think of as higher earning families, but potentially a $90,000 a year price tag is not feasible.
Okay. All right. And just, I know we'll talk about this more in a minute, but this is determined by the FAFSA.
Yes, right? I'm going to go over that in just a second. Okay. Yep. So merit aid. So merit aid is all institutional based. The federal government is not going to give any merit-based aid. So aid that is given to a student not based on their need, but by their academics, maybe their extracurriculars, maybe because of their leadership skills. This is all going to come from institutions, so on the institution level.
Okay.
Finally, we have outside scholarships. So these are money that come from other institutions. Some of them are famous. The Target has a big one. And then sometimes it's just your local, right? Like my kids went to Anne Arundel County Public Schools. They have the Sports Boosters Club has a scholarship. Our local police department has an actually pretty generous scholarship. So those are considered outside scholarships. So I think we want to think about like three three sources of money that kids can use to pay for college. First being need-based aid, so money that you're getting because your family has a financial need. Second, merit-based aid, which is what institutions are using to recruit students that they want for a particular reason. And then outside scholarships. So these are institutions that are not connected to a university or the federal government who give students money to attend college.
Okay.
So now let's talk about the FAFSA versus the CSS profile. So both of these are documents that collect information on families and students' finances. The FAFSA is a federal a document or like a worksheet that comes out from the federal government. Many schools just use the FAFSA, and it's going to ask you questions about the students' incomes, the students' asset, parent incomes, parents' assets. And it shoots at a number that's called an SAI, which is the student aid index, basically how much a family is expected to contribute to the college tuition. All right. And now we have the CSS profile. And I will link this in the show notes, but there are many schools that use the CSS profile in addition to the FAFSA. And this is a much deeper dive, like I think they call it like a wallet autopsy, but a much bigger dive into a family's income and assets. They ask questions like how many students are in a family, which is something the FAFSA, when they did a big overhaul last year, has stopped asking and really hurts some big families. They ask questions about medical circumstances, much deeper dive into a family's assets. For some families, and then they also calculate, it's not called an SAI, but then each university that uses the CSS profile has a different algorithm to calculate how much they think that family should be able to contribute into college.
And what types of schools rely on information on from those two different documents?
Yeah, so there's hundreds of schools that use both.
Okay.
Hundreds, and we will link the list. And then it's really important to remember that each school that uses the CSS profile is then using a different algorithm to calculate what they expect a family to contribute to college. And so, for example, many schools that use the CSS profile will take into consideration if you have other kids in college. This is something that FAFSA does not take into consideration.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, for our family, we now have 3 people in university, but I don't think we have filled out the CSS profile.
Well, you'd have to, if the William and Mary takes it. So if a school is just a FAFSA, the school just accepts a FAFSA as of the new federal overhaul. And this is really hurt families. They no longer, it used to be that when a school calculated their SAI, back then it was called EFC, expected family contribution. And let's say they expected you to be able to contribute $40,000 a year. They would just split, if you have 2 kids in college, you would just divide it by 2. And so you'd be expected to contribute $20,000 for each kid. FAFSA schools that only take the FAFSA no longer take that into consideration, which is something that really hurt families.
That's a huge chunk of money that they're totally ignoring.
Yeah. So I think CSS profile schools can be surprising for parents in both directions. The CSS profile is really good at finding, maybe you've hid some money in your 3 vacation homes, and that's going to come up on your CSS profile in a way that it may not come up on your FAFSA. On the other hand, if you're, having a circumstance there's a financial drain on your family, such as a medical circumstance, that will also be reported in the CSS profile and not on the FAFSA. And so it's really, some families find that the CSS profile has a higher number in terms of how much they expect families to contribute, but for other families, they can be surprised by how much lower it is. So that's we'll go into more detail about that.
Okay. Wow.
All right. So I am super passionate about affordability in college. This is why I do what I do. I think that the college financing process is totally backwards compared to anything we shop for. I made the analogy before, but most families looking at a 6-figure investment. that's buying a home, that's buying a fancy car every year. But unlike these other things we shop for with colleges, we shop and then we take out a loan at the very end. Once your kid is committed to the school they're going to, that summer, you're calling up your banks and trying to get those loans. For houses and cars, we do that budgeting process before we even start shopping. You can't even make an offer on a house without a pre-approval letter for a loan. So something I really, really suggest parents do is kind of take the same perspective that you would if you were buying a car or a house, and do that with the college process. So work backwards, figure out what you can afford, determine your monthly payments like you would with a house or a car, and then start shopping around for the college. As you can start doing this as early as freshman or as early as a 9th or 10th grade year, just to set those realistic expectations for your kids about how much money, what can you afford as a monthly payment, and setting those expectations with your kids.
It's so important. I mean, that manages their expectations. It helps them create that list that we talked about last session, last podcast, that like actually they can attend, rather than creating this dream list. And then you're the bad guy, mom and dad, that have to say, yeah, sorry, I know you got in, but we can't afford it.
Yeah. And it's better to be pleasantly surprised in the opposite direction.
Right.
All right. So there's so many amazing tools for helping family figure out what that budget looks like. So the first, I'm going to go through 3 of them. And I think playing around, I'm a huge numbers person, so I think it's super fun. But playing around with your kids, so there's full transparency about these conversations. So the first is how to find your student aid index. And we will link these, but online it's called the Federal Student Aid Estimator. And this gives you an estimate of how much the federal government will expect you to be able to contribute to college. It uses the tax information from the tax year that is 2 years prior to your student's first year of college. So this has really big implications for if you've lost a job in the 2 years.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Yes, it's called the double look back. And so it's really, I'm not a financial advisor, but if you work with one, it's important that you are, again, making these financial decisions when your kid is in 9th or 10th grade, because they do this double look back.
Oh my gosh. And I'm just thinking about this past calendar year, how many employment situations have changed for our foreign service families. And, if you've moved from, like, we were fortunate enough to move from a post of a lower differential to a higher differential, but then I'm not working this year.
Right.
And so
for our foreign service families, the bouncing around of household income is wild. Yeah. Think about, sometimes you're a tandem, then there's times when you're not tandem. That's a 50% pay cut. I think that these are all things where you have to be very, very intentional and remembering that double look back.
Yep. Okay. That is a definite asterisk to keep checking back on that.
Yes. And I will say I worked with a student this summer whose mom lost her job during the dojing, and we were able to win an appeal because of that. But that was a very, very stressful summer for the student, and the new financial aid package didn't come back out till July. And then the family had like 3 weeks to shop around for private loans to fill the gap. So
was that for a private school or a public?
A private school.
Okay. And yeah, that's a different sort of a conversation than with a public university.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. Next tool, the net price calculator. So any schools that take federal funds must publish this calculator called a net price calculator. If you remember what I mentioned earlier, some schools use FAFSA, some schools to determine federal aid, and some schools use CSS profile, and they all have different algorithms to determine whether a family qualifies for need-based aid. Harvard or Princeton saying families with 200,000 plus income are needy families, right? There are other schools that you need to have much bringing home a lot less money to qualify for need-based aid. And so it's almost impossible to predict whether a family, what a family is going to be expected to pay. And so these net price calculators are really, really helpful to give a sense of what that's going to look like. Kids put in oftentimes on these, and they're different on every university has a different net price calculator because they're using different algorithms to make their class and pay their bills. Remember, can't say this enough, colleges are businesses. They also have to pay their bills. But the net price calculator then will shoot you out what they expect you to pay. Almost nobody is paying the sticker price for university. It's kind of like going on an airplane and you look to the left and to the right and everyone's paying a different amount. It's the same when you look at colleges and universities. And then lastly, I think this is the most important, is using the federal student aid loan stimulator. So loan calculator that I really recommend doing with your son or daughter and looking at what the implications are for taking out $100,000, $60,000, or even $20,000 in debt, and what that looks like for your monthly payments. If you're going to have a monthly payment of $600 a month, what does that look like if you are a teacher? What does that mean if you are a nurse practitioner? And having that important conversation with your kids. So those are the 3 tools that I think are really helpful. I think using them together is a great way to try to set that budget.
Well, especially in this, I mean, our kids that are applying for schools or are going to schools now, they're obviously not looking for their profession. They're not looking for their job right now. But if we look at today's economy and the job situations and kind of the looming AI implications, these are really important factors to consider. What will your loan payment be, and what sort of job will you be able to have and be able to cover the payments? I mean, our kids are amazing and super intelligent and fascinating human beings, but oftentimes teenagers aren't really the ones that are the best at looking postgraduate, like thinking about the future. So,
and sometimes even parents, right? They think, I've had parents say, we're willing to take out $100,000. And I think that's amazing and super generous. And they're taking it out in their names. A couple of things to remember. If you're saying that, where are you going to get that $100,000? I've had parents say that and not get approved because you're taking out bank loans and you don't know if your family income isn't very high. It may not be easy to get that out. And you may be shopping around for loans with very, very, very high interest rates. So again, this is so different than cars and houses where you have to have a pre-approval letter. You admit and you get admitted and sign that you're going to a college without any pre-approval loan process. And now you're going from bank to bank to bank trying to get these large loans. It can be very, very, very challenging. So doing this with your kid before you start the process, and definitely before you sign that acceptance. So
this all sounds very dreary.
Well, let's talk about some positive things. So there's part of the reason why I'm passionate about this is because I just don't think very few families need to be paying the full price for college. And there's lots of ways to get that price tag down. I first want to talk about increasing need-based aid. So if you're one of those families that is going to qualify for need-based aid, meaning the college itself, the university itself, or the federal government deems that your family has a financial need, there are several ways to do that. So I want to remind you guys about SAI, Student Aid Index. I'm talking about families with a very low SAI. All right. And remember, your SAI can go as low as negative $1,500. So, and that's what you're being expected to contribute each year. So if you have a low SAI, my suggestion is, well, I have a lot of suggestions, but if you are a high achieving student with a low SAI, we want to look at those target the 100 to 125 of what we consider like elite schools. So schools with big endowments. They don't offer any merit aid, and they're only giving money to families with demonstrated need. So these are your Ivies. These are your small liberal arts colleges in New England, Williams, Bowdoin, and they're really, really trying. Their institutional priorities are we are going to use our large endowment to help eliminate the gap. So the gap between what a family is able to pay and the price of the university. There are more than 20 schools, and this is increasing every year. There's, if you follow the news, almost every month there's another school that comes out with this that have no loan policies, meaning they are promising that there will be no gap between what a student is expected to pay and the price tag of the university. When you're looking at these schools that meet financial need, it's important to remember that you're still going to be expected to pay that number that Pop shoots out as your SAI. They also want kids to contribute to their college tuition themselves. And so Harvard, for example, says students are expected to cover $3,500 per year, right? So the expectation is that both parents and kids have skin in the game. So even when they're meeting that gap, even when they're going to say we meet full need, they are still expecting a kid's working over the summer to contribute. They are still expecting work study. They're expecting that parents are putting a large part of their incomes into the college tuition. And then the last thing is most of these schools that really serve kids with high need, they're not using the FAFSA. They have their own formulas for figuring out need-based aid. And so it's really important to use the net price calculator to figure out what these schools would look like.
And how does a family find these schools with a no loan policy?
Yeah, so we can link some schools with no loan policies, but I would say even schools that don't have no loan policies, when you're looking at schools with big endowments and that don't offer merit aid, so they make it very clear we do not offer merit aid. Those are the schools that tend to have higher need-based packages. And I can link some sources for this. And I also think, not to plug myself, but this is where working with an education consultant is super important, because a lot of this is just having like a deep knowledge of what schools are very generous and whose institutional priorities are meeting the need of need-based families.
And this would primarily be private schools.
I'm only talking about private schools.
Okay. Yeah.
In fact, I work a fair amount with kids with high financial need, doing pro bono services, and a high achieving kid with high financial need almost always can get a lower price tag than their public institution, because a public institution cannot guarantee to meet all.
Yeah, they kind of have their hands tied in different ways.
Lots of ways, yeah. And so they can't recruit students in the same way, and they can't commit to meeting the need of every school in the way that a private institution with a large endowment can.
Okay. Let's talk about increasing merit aid.
Yeah, so there's another set of kids who are not going to qualify for need-based aid. We're going to qualify for very little. But have no fear, that doesn't mean you have to pay the sticker price. Now let's look at merit aid. So this is a different set of schools. We're looking at schools now who offer very, very strong merit aid packages. And this is nuanced and hard to figure out that list, but there's a lot of data sets you can look at, and we'll link those. Big J Educational Consultants that I've met before has some really nice workbooks where you can filter through merit aid packages. But when we're looking at schools that offer really strong merit aid packages, we're going to look at schools that are, when you're doing your research and looking through these data sets, you're going to look at schools that are offering merit aid to 30% of students or more.
Okay, that's a pretty big number.
Yeah, it means they're really intentionally using their endowment to attract high achieving kids. You want to look at schools where your student is in the top quartile of the academic profile. And then looking at schools with an admit rate between 50 and 80%. Those tend to be the schools that are offering larger merit aid packages. When you're thinking about this with your kids, don't think about merit aid as a prize. It's not a prize. It's that these schools are trying to recruit and retain kids. And so if your kid is in the top quartile, that school is going to be using the money they have to try to recruit your student to come. When I'm talking with kids about college and the cost of college, we talk a lot about the trade-off between merit packages and university prestige. So oftentimes the more prestigious a university is, they don't really have a need to offer big merit packages. If you get into Harvard, Harvard doesn't really need to recruit or doesn't really need to use merit aid to recruit and get you to come. Whereas a smaller school that is maybe slightly less prestigious, a Lafayette, a Denison in Columbus, Ohio, now they're going to be using merit packages to say, come to us. We're going to drop your price. We're going to drop our price tag. And these are hard conversations, right? Because your kid may be tempted by that prestigious university. Mm-hmm. And so we need to have that conversation. All right, higher prestige, we don't have any need-based aid. The merit's just not going to come through. It's really important when we have these conversations to talk to kids about what does prestigious mean. It's very different than quality of education or rigor of coursework. And so just because you're maybe trading off for a bigger aid package for a less prestigious school does not mean your kid is going to have a less quality of education or have a less challenging academic experience.
We talked about this last recording as well, in that that big name school isn't necessarily going to be a good fit for your kid anyway. So maybe a smaller school, maybe a less competitive school would be a better fit. And then along with that, they would have these opportunities for more merit-based aid.
Yeah. And just to quickly talk about public universities are always an excellent option. In-state public universities are an excellent option for students. I think sometimes even the in-state tuition can be challenging for certain families to pay for. And like I said before, I have found that I have kids who oftentimes are paying a lower price tag at a private institution than they would at their public university. And I think that's a huge part of what I do as an independent education consultant, is work with kids and try to figure out if it's a stretch even to pay for the public university. Let's look at private universities that would be so excited to have you, who will recruit you with these big merit aid packages. And then if you have a child who's ambivalent about going to their local public university, let's find these private schools that maybe potentially meet all their need, or they use these big merit packages. I'm a huge fan of public institutions, and I think that those are really great options as well.
Well, I know we have more to talk about with scholarship and other types of aid opportunities, but let's really quickly here talk about the domicile applications that Foreign Service families can do. And now we have we officially fall under the law that was passed some time ago to support family members and military members in order for them to get the in-state tuition of their state of domicile. So now Foreign Service families and Foreign Service members and their families all qualify as well. But I think it's really important to know that this is, so now it's across the board for every state, but you have to prove it to the institution. And so different states have different universities have different requirements of what sort of paperwork that they would require in order to determine domicile. And so basically what that means is if you prove that you are a domicile of that state, you get in-state tuition. So for us, two of our kids are going to a public Virginia university, and we switched to being Virginia residents. I don't even know how, maybe like 5 years before our eldest applied. And it took a copious amount of paperwork to prove to the school that we were indeed Virginia residents. But, and I should say, and just because the eldest was approved as a Virginia resident didn't necessarily mean that the middle one as well, even though they attend the same university. So for us, it was, we had to supply tax, like tax return copies. We had to supply W-2s, and we had to supply copies of orders that determined why we were overseas. So different universities will have different requirements. But maybe you know a bit more about that, Hannah?
Yeah, I just think that this new law that was official in 2024 that sees put State Department, there's been a law around for a very long time that allows for military families a federal mandate that they can get in-state tuition, both where their either where their duty station is or where their state of domicile. I never can say that word. Domicile is, even if they haven't been there for many, many years. So now State Department families, Foreign Service families are also included under this law, which will hopefully make this process a bit smoother and make it easier to appeal if a school is hesitant. I think my only thing I want to say is I have worked with families who say, well, grandma lives in Florida, so we're just doing in-state in Florida. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So making sure you're doing your research about what paperwork you need to prove that you are in state. And then please feel free to reach out to me if you have any issues with the appeal process. I've helped with those.
We found that, and again, the institutions vary, but we found that the contact we had at the university where the boys are going, they were so helpful, and they couldn't tell us what we had to do. They couldn't say, you have to supply these particular forms, but they wanted to help. And I feel like they, along with the admissions team, want kids to come to their university, right? They don't want to make it harder for you. They already know it's hard. So I do think that if you do your homework and find out, what it would take for that particular university, they will really support you in that process.
One thing I tell families when you're doing appeals that involve either federal funding or state funding, people's jobs are on the line, because if they get audited and you're saying you live in Virginia, but you actually don't, they've submitted that paperwork to the state. Institutions get audited, and there's fraud in this realm. And so although it's extremely frustrating, admissions or financial aid office needs to make sure they have all the paperwork in line. So when the state of Virginia comes back and says, is Hannah Engel, like, we need to see that Hannah Engel Roberts should be paying in state, or that Hannah Engel Roberts actually gets the full, federal grant, they need to have all of that paperwork to back them up.
That's a really important point.
It is, as much as it's annoying, it is our tax. It is the dollars that we pay in taxes that support these institutions. And so this process is frustrating, but I think it is important as well.
But also, it is worth the effort to prove your domicile if you are legitimately a resident of a state, because that is a significant difference in the cost of tuition.
Grandma living in Florida is not a residence. So make sure you do your homework when your kids are young and figure out how you get that residence.
Yeah. Let's talk about other sources of funds, outside scholarships.
Yeah. So outside scholarships. So kids often are like, well, there's this big gap in what my family can pay and what the institution's offering me, but it's fine. I got it. I'm applying to a lot of outside scholarships. So I'm here to be honest about outside scholarships. So first, you have to be very, very, very strategic when applying to scholarships. I've had kids apply to 30, 40 scholarships. That is a time suck. Many of the school scholarships that don't require essays, it makes me wonder, right? So I'll just say that. So it can be even the ones that are not a time suck. I question their legitimacy. And so I think having that conversation, if we're going to be spending 10 hours a week applying to scholarships, is that the best use of time, or does it make sense to get a job or focus on your AP and IB courses so that then you can get a higher merit aid? Just trade-offs with our time. If you are going to be applying for outside scholarships, looking at local scholarships first. And I know that's harder for foreign service kids, but even looking back at the community potentially in the United States, where you're originally from, and seeing what type of local scholarships are offered. Those are, when I've worked with kids, I find they have the most success or most likely to get the scholarships when they are local scholarships. A lot of scholarships are non-renewable. So great, you got maybe $1,000, but that's just for 1 year. So when you're doing your calculations of, am I going to go to this institution? Remember that that is just a 1-year scholarship. I think the other side of the coin, so one is they take a lot of effort and the scholarships are oftentimes very small. The flip side is if your kid gets $1,000 scholarship, I say to kids, okay, so you're making $15 an hour working at Chick-fil-A. I mean, that's pretty amazing. You just got $1,000. Like, think about how many hours of work, and think about that's $1,000 less of debt that you're taking out with the interest rate. And so I see both sides to this. I think that being strategic about what you're applying to and how much time you're spending, but then also if your kid gets the, school band booster scholarship, that's $1,000, like really celebrating that, because that's their computer. It's not a small amount of money. And I think sometimes what happens with parents is when we're talking about big sums of money, so we sometimes can lose sight that a big number is just the sum of a lot of small numbers. And so so any money makes a difference, especially when you're looking at compounding interest, which we are with college. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is stacking versus displacement. And this is something that you have to look at for each university. So schools that let you stack mean that they give you your financial aid, they give you your merit aid, they give you your need-based aid. And if you get a big scholarship, you get to use that money to pay what you were expected to contribute. But there's a lot of schools that practice displacement. And I've had this happen with kids that I've worked with. I've had a kid who I'm making the numbers up, but a true story, potentially their family contribution was $12,000 a year. That's what the school had them paying. They've got a big national scholarships, one of those big money ones, and they get their financial aid package back from the school, and they're still expected to pay $12,000 a year.
So they dropped the amount
that the institution.
Oh, wow.
And this happens a lot. It's called displacement, meaning they do not allow you to stack the scholarships from the merit aid and the financial aid from the school, and then also the outside scholarships. And so there is a chance that even if your kid gets $1,000 income, if it's got $1,000 scholarship, now your aid package is $1,000 less.
How do you find out if the institution?
It's on there. It should be on their website.
Okay.
Yeah. And so if your kid isn't planning on going to a school that practices displacement, I would caution against spending too much time
for the outside
scholarships.
Okay.
Because if a school is expecting a kid to contribute $3,500 and they're doing all these algorithms about it, that expectation doesn't change even if a big award letter comes in. So now a university is pocketing that scholarship. That school student itself is not seeing a dime of the Coca-Cola scholarship.
I mean, the altruistic me is thinking, okay, well, hopefully then some other kid got a larger financial package.
Yeah, for sure.
But wow, that is interesting.
Yes. And especially high achieving, high need kids, I think are oftentimes most vulnerable to this, because those are the kids that are getting the full rides into top institutions and then potentially also getting that Coca-Cola scholarship, that Dell scholarship. And all of a sudden they're still really struggling to pay for university.
So those families and students that are interested in these outside scholarships, besides, looking at the poster boards in their local community, which of course you're overseas, so that's a little more challenging. I know some states have places where you can find a list of all of the outside. Is that
Yeah, and
across the board?
I can connect some links to scholarships. The number one is your college counselor, because they, not your independent education consultant, but the college counselor at the school, because literally, like, they are the ones who the Anne Arundel County Police Station still has a couple $1,000s to give away, and they're calling up that high school and saying, hey.
Is that the same for international schools? Right?
Yeah, I think international schools may also have that connection. And then I think I'll link there are some great resources for finding scholarships.
Okay.
Again, being strategic about what this is what I'll say. I think that a lot of parents want their kids to have skin in the game financially.
Right.
And so oftentimes parents say that as in, okay, now you've applied to schools, now let's apply for scholarships. And I guess I'm not saying don't apply for scholarships. I think look for those hyper local scholarships. I also think being strategic, are there other ways our son or daughter could have skin in the game? And what does that look in the financial of it? And if that may be, a job, there's other ways. But I've had kids have a lot of success with outside scholarships. So I am not trying to totally discourage. I just think being strategic is important.
No, that is important. That is really important. All right. Do you have any other ways to cut costs?
Yes. Okay. So lots of other ways to cut costs. So first, and what I love, AP, IB courses. I have kids who go into top universities, and I have kids who go into state schools who have a full semester of coursework they don't need to take because they've done so well on their AP and IB tests. And I'm a huge fan of dual enrollment courses, which is harder to do with the State Department, but not impossible. And I can also provide some resources with that. But dual enrollment courses are really great. I am such a believer of kids having exposure to what a university level course will look like before they go to college. And a dual enrollment course doesn't have a end of year test. And so, whereas an AP and IB course, you will only get credit if you score a certain score on them. With dual enrollment, you get credit if you pass the course.
Is it reasonable to think that someone could do a dual enrollment course and an IB load?
An IB diploma load? No. Okay. But I have lots of kids who take AP stat, they're passionate about business, they're taking AP stats, and they're taking an intro finance course at their local community college. One thing I want to caution about dual enrollment courses, that is a college course. It will stay with you forever. Failing or getting a bad grade on your dual enrollment course will stay with you forever, because that is now on your college transcript. So trade-off, AP and IB, you have to pass an end of year test. Dual enrollment course, you do not. Flip side, you start messing around second semester of senior year, or the course is legitimately really, really hard. You're taking, linear algebra at your local community college, and it's really, really hard. That's staying with you forever. And that I have had kids who've had implications with that. That has had implications for them because they didn't understand. Summer jobs is huge, harder when you're State Department. Schools that offer co-ops. So a lot of schools and more are offering these co-op programs where you actually get paid while you're getting course credit. The most famous ones, Northeastern and Boston, University of Cincinnati has an amazing co-op program. These are ways kids can save money while they're in school. My favorite money saving tactic is being a residential advisor. You now no longer pay housing. That's saves kids a ton of money their second, third, and fourth year of college. Again, this is a program you have to apply to. And so it's not guaranteed when you're doing that calculations with your kids. You can't say, well, we won't pay for housing sophomore, junior, and senior year because my kid's going to be a residential advisor. No. Some schools, that is a very selective program.
And it is a job. There are responsibilities that go along with it.
But I had a lot of my higher need financially kids have great success with the residential advisor, particularly if you're in a school in Boston, New York City, where housing is really expensive. It can cut costs a lot. Another way to cut costs is off-campus housing, obviously like living with family, or sometimes just like the apartment off campus. That first year housing is so expensive. I mean, there's schools where it's $1,000 a month for, a quad. So you can spend a lot less and be in a house. The house also means that you can cook your own food. You're not stuck to a meal plan. One side note, so meal plans are very expensive when you're looking at the cost of colleges. I've had many kids try to appeal, especially that first year being on a meal plan. And I have not had a lot of success with that. And one of the reasons schools have told me is that there's been a lot of news around kids who can't afford college, going hungry, going to school and not having money for food. And so something that's like very, very, very important for schools is they're making sure that first year a kid is housed and eating well. There's some irony in that because the meal plan is shockingly expensive.
I would say, I'm trying to think about all of the universities that we looked at. I think all of them required first year to live on campus. And the school where the boys are now, our freshman, the meal plan changed. Now it's all you can eat. So it became even more expensive, the meal plan. But some of the schools that we looked at required 2 years on campus. One even required 4 years on campus.
Yeah.
So I guess this is an important question to explore if you are maybe considering off-campus housing.
Yeah.
And make sure your kid can cook.
Yeah.
Which is another factor.
So I think don't bank on being able to appeal a meal plan. I have not had success with that, even with my very high need students, financially. But I do think taking into consideration that could be an expense you only have for 1 year. Something a lot of people don't realize is there are actually scholarships for upperclassmen. And so don't stop. And sometimes those are less competitive, right? Because less people know about them. So don't stop your scholarship search after your first year. There could be research-based scholarships, lots of ways to cut costs that are available, not just that year before you enter college. And then the fast track programs. So there's really cool options for kids who know what they want to do, who can get it done more quickly. So that's a great opportunity.
The other thing that I would add is at every university, professors are allotted small amounts of funds in order to do their own research, because professors are part of their job is to also not just to teach, but also to like continue their own studies and do research. And they are allotted funds to do these research projects, to use at their discretion. And sometimes they'll use that to fund the study. Sometimes they'll use that to fund assistants and students to help them with the study. So it's worth, especially if there's a professor that your kid clicks with that first year, then they can get onto that study with this professor. And then not only are they learning, research methods and really connecting with a specific point of study, but they're also making money. It's not a lot, but it is pocket money.
And I think you're bringing up work study. So when you get your aid package from the federal government, work study will be one of the items on there. So what is work study? Work study is a opportunity that the university provides where you can work on campus, get paid, usually not very high. That money goes straight to the student. And so the student can use it to pay for housing, pay for tuition, or pay for Chick-fil-A. One conversation I've had with kids is if they are located in an area where there are opportunities for higher paying jobs. Sometimes the work study jobs aren't the highest paying jobs, but like my work study job was working at the library and I did my homework while I did it. And so I think that there's lots of opportunities for work study jobs that potentially either have an academic benefit, like working for a professor, or are less rigorous than serving tables.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there is a lot to be said about the service industry.
Okay, some helpful tips. And I know this has been a lot.
We're almost done.
We're almost really. Okay, this is my favorite topic though. So number one is always submit your FAFSA. You don't know when you could potentially need a loan. And you cannot get a federal government loan unless you've submitted your FAFSA. All kids qualify for a certain amount from the federal government, no matter income levels. And so it's so important to me that all kids submit FAFSA. Additionally, there are some schools that won't look at merit aid not all schools, unless you've submitted your FAFSA. And then also it could be a good savvy financial decision for your parents for the parents to take out that loan. If your money in the stock market is making tons of money and a low interest rate loan make sense financially. Again, I'm not a financial advisor, but for some families, even high earners, it may make sense to pay part of the college tuition. Your money may have more value being invested than in paying for finances. I mean, and then paying for the college tuition. Parents get nervous about submitting FAFSA, and this is nuanced, but colleges are business, and very, very, very small number of schools are need blind, meaning they are not looking at a family's financial situation when determining whether to accept the student. And so if you are checking the box that you are applying for financial aid, people worry that this is going, when schools are running their own predictive models to make sure they can meet their budget, that this may hurt their student, because this means the student is not going to pay the full price tag. My suggestion for parents, if this is your concern and you're not dependent on those merit aid packages and those financial aid packages, but you're listening to my advice and you're going to make sure you have access to that loan, you can always submit the FAFSA in May. So once your kid has gotten, so you don't apply for financial aid. Once the kid has been accepted, just submit the FAFSA. Then you'll have access to that federal student loan that all kids have the right to. Next helpful tip, public schools. So public schools in state, great option, oftentimes the most affordable option for kids. Out of state, this can be insanely expensive. So if your kid is telling you, your residency is in Colorado and they want to go to big football school in the Midwest, look at those costs of attendance out of state, because they really, really vary. So my example is University of Michigan, $84,000 out of state. But your kid who wants to go to a big football school in the Midwest, Purdue's $45,000. Same goes for those southern state schools, really vary. If your kid wants to be in that warm weather and that, Greek life, football culture, they really, those public out of state tuitions really vary. All right, if something changes in your finances, you can recalculate your SAI. You can go through an appeal process. That's really important for people to remember, especially given our current climate with federal government workers. Remembering that when you're submitting your FAFSA, it's doing that double look back. So 2 tax years before. If your kid is getting big merit scholarships, they must maintain their GPA to keep those scholarships. Mm-hmm. And then I think the last thing I want to say is that the landscape's really changing. The Big Beautiful Bill had big implications for federal aid. And so just a disclaimer that things will be changing, and it's a very dynamic time. So again, kind of a plug for working with an independent education consultant. Our job is to keep on top of all these changes. And so I think the benefit can be huge with working with someone.
It feels like it's a very squishy formula for determining what financial aid you'll get, merit-based, need-based, and outside scholarship. But it also feels like there's a lot of advocacy that you as a parent can do, that the student can do on their own behalf. And then the conversation isn't just, you submit the form and then you're done. Like, depending on the university, there are places where you can have conversations with the university in order to discuss and potentially change the price tag.
So when you can appeal financial aid, something that as an independent education consultant, we do. I think it's really important, if you're going to appeal, you need 2 offers. Well, there's many different ways to appeal. This could be a whole podcast. But if you're trying to appeal just based on, you want to make sure you're comparing offers from 2 very similar schools.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And we can feel free to reach out to me and I can give a lot more information on actually appealing financial aid
Okay.
packages.
So maybe will be a future podcast, but we can talk about it at that point. But just know that the price that the school quotes you or gives you isn't necessarily, I mean, depending on the school, depending on if it's private or public, there's a lot of different asterisks here, but there's a little bit of wiggle room. But like Hannah was saying, like the point of this conversation was to help kind of shed a lot of lights onto making university more accessible and affordable. And so hopefully we have helped to really highlight some of the different ways that we can either get more money coming to you or maybe get the price tag at the end of the tunnel a little bit smaller. Any final thoughts, Hannah?
No, I just think remembering that like financial fit is a really important part of the equation. And earlier you talk about it, there's, as I always say, there's 4,000 plus schools in the United States. We haven't even talked about Europe, Canada, Australia. So lots of ways to not pay that sticker price.
So a little foreshadowing there that is a future conversation. But thank you so much for listening. We hope that we've helped answer a few questions or highlighted some questions that you do need to like do your homework on. And we look forward to sharing another podcast soon about yet another topic that relates to foreign service kids attending universities. If you have any questions or points that you'd like us to research or cover, please do let us know. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.